We can get started then. Thank you everybody for coming. Before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're holding this event on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. Indigenous communities have some of the oldest storytelling traditions in the world, and these are traditions that we can all learn from as people interested in literature and storytelling. At this event today, we have the honor of hosting Clare Richards. To just give you an introduction for Clare, she is an award-winning literary translator working from Korean. Her debut full-length translation, Kang Hwa-gil's Gothic Villa, Another Person, was released in 2023, and she has since gone on to publish multiple works, including a co-translation of the New York Times best-selling BTS Beyond the Story with Anton Ha and Slin Jung. She has taught at the British Centre for Literary Translation Summer School and is also the current National Centre for Writing Emerging Translator Mentorship Mentor in Korean. Clare has spoken and written openly about her experiences as an autistic translator. In articles like Something Solid and Unshakable for Massachusetts Review and Face Value Translating Divergence for Words Without Borders, she discusses representations of neurodivergence and disability in translated literature and underscores the significance of deaf, disabled, and neurodivergent writers and translators presenting their community on their own terms. Today, she's here to discuss these topics with us at the ANU, which we are very grateful for. So I will just hand it off to Clare, but without further ado, please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming today, and really thank you. I'm really grateful, especially to the university and all the faculty here for inviting me and hosting me. It's been a wonderful experience so far. I'm really excited to be talking about this topic that's really important to me, and I think is one that really is I'd love to hear more people talking about as well. Say that I was told that this could be quite casual, so there will be a lot of memes in this presentation, particularly cat memes. And
oh, that's not a cat, though, dog memes.
I'm afraid I'm not a dog person, so if that's an issue for you, I'm very sorry. I would say that just to mention some content warnings, I will be talking about some statistics about mental illness and suicide, just briefly, because I think that they are important to understand in the context of what I'm talking about. Just so that you know in advance, but I won't be going into any further details beyond that, as well as talking about some personal experiences of mental illness. But again, I'm not going to go into much details about any of that, but just to put into context something that I think is very important. So just as a brief overview of what I'll talk about today, and this is a very big topic, so it was actually quite difficult to put it into one short talk. So it will be more of a whistle-stop tour. So I will be focusing on autism specifically rather than neurodivergence and disability as a whole, just because it's a very big topic and there wasn't really the space. When I was writing this presentation, I realized, always how much there is to say. But I will recommend some reading, and that if you're interested in this topic, you can go into more. So just as an overview of what I'll be talking about, I will start off with discussing my personal journey to becoming a literary translator and my autism diagnosis. I will then talk a bit about how autism is misrepresented in media and research. Then I'll talk about what I think that autism really is, and then I'll go on to say what this has to do with translation and talk a bit about what being a literary translator involves. Yeah, so this is just a bit of background on me, and if, there's my website there and my Instagram. I have you can see any articles I've written or talks I've given, things like they should try to keep my website up to date. If you are interested in knowing more about this topic, this is my house in the countryside where I translate from a very small village, so I work and translate listening to the sound of chickens and goats, and the only traffic that goes past is tractors and horses, so yeah, it's very nice. This is not the slide I expected. Yes, this one. I'll come back to that. So, just in terms of how I came to become a literary translator, it's something actually. It's always a bit of a long story to tell. When I meet someone for the first time and they ask what I do, and I say usually I just say I'm a translator, but if they ask further, I'll say I'm a literary translator, and they ask what language I translate from, and they're usually quite surprised, and they're quite intrigued as to how I end up there. Sometimes I end up meeting some people who actually, just recently I met a man in his 50s, just a British man who got really into K-pop during lockdown. So you find people actually know so much, so you expect people to be like, oh, I don't know anything about your field, but sometimes you'll be surprised. And yeah, so I have a psychology background, so I studied psychology at Oxford University, and I always thought that I would keep going psychology, do my PhD, become a clinical psychologist or an educational psychologist. Always thought I would stay in academia. But when I was at school, I had two passions really. It was psychology and it was languages. Even though at school I didn't really have the opportunity to fully immerse myself in a language. In the UK, the language education system, particularly in England, is not great. I've heard it's similar here in Australia, which is, which is a real shame when you consider the other, particularly the European countries, speaking multiple languages fluently is, a given. So it's really, it's quite, I think, a shame and a really real missed opportunity. So I always had a fascination with languages, particularly grammar, and so that's why after I graduated, I thought I'll take this opportunity to go and live somewhere else and immerse myself in another language, because there's this kind of academic fascination with grammar and language, and something that I've never been able to explore. So I took that opportunity and I thought, okay, I'll do this for a few years and then I'll go back and do my PhD in psychology. So I wanted to study a language that was grammatically completely different from English. So the languages furthest away grammatically from English are Japanese and Korean. There was an teaching opportunity called the JET program in Japan. Some of you may have heard of it. So I went to do that, and I self-taught Japanese alongside. I don't think that would be necessarily easy for most people, but I was very, very, very motivated at the time. Once I got into now I'm in my 30s, I don't quite have the same motivation for learning new things, but in my early 20s I was working a full day of work and coming back and studying for several hours, and but anyway, that's what I was doing at the time, and I really enjoyed the language learning side of it, and I really just developed a fascination with learning languages, and so that's when I started studying Korean when I was in Japan, and then I just became more interested in learning Korean, and there's also more opportunities for funding for Korean language, at least compared to Japanese, for studying the language more, doing masters. So I did my moved back to the UK, and I did a master's in Korean studies. at SOAS in London, and then I went to study the language. I really wanted to get better at Korean language. I hadn't had the opportunity to immerse myself before. It's really limited how much you can, in my experience, how much you can improve in a language if you don't have that level of immersion, whether it's with the people around you or actually being in the country. So I went to Yonsei University Language School and studied there. Then I came back to UK and I worked at the UK version of the Korean Cultural Centre, or the London Korean Film Festival, and this was really where things started to, where I started to kind of think things might be wrong or something wasn't quite right, because I'd always, I think in the world of academia, I had always kind of flourished, and I'd got along fine. Life wasn't always easy. But it was really when I went into the real world of work that something began to occur to me. And because this was my second time, when I was in Japan, I really, really, really struggled. Even though I loved learning a language, I was constantly in and out the hospital, unwell. I was extremely anxious. I became severely depressed. So it was affecting me physically and mentally. All these things that I'd never experienced before. And I think I kind of tried to ignore that when I came back. But then my second time in the real world of work, the same thing happened again. And I was like, this is very strange, because everyone around me doing the same job as me, they get a bit stressed, but they're fine. They can cope with working in an office of other people. They're not like going to the toilets, every day and crying and those kind of things and trying to hold it together. So I think at that point I was like, there's something, I felt, the word that I always used to describe it was I felt like an alien. And it's something that I only really felt when I'm put into that situation. And I just couldn't see, like, the way I thought about things, the way I experienced things, just seemed to be really different from other people, and I couldn't really understand why. This is a kind of a funny mean to express the kind of overwhelm that I felt every day. It was like my brain was going to explode. So there was this TV program that around the time, it's a documentary that was aired in the UK. It's called Are You Autistic? And I watched that, and that was the first thing that kind of started to get me thinking. So there's all sorts of people interviewed in here and who share their experiences, but the thing that struck me was the women who were talking about their experiences of being autistic, and something started to click, and I started thinking, could this be me? And the thing that was very kind of, there was a lot of unpacking for me to do, because I have a younger brother who's also autistic, and he was diagnosed at the age of 5. So my family, had always known about autism. I'd read loads of books on autism. I did a whole research project on autism when I was at university. I met with autism researchers. I knew everything, all the research there was about autism. None of it ever aligned with me and my experiences. And that was very interesting. But then this was kind of about women sharing their experiences, saying actually how we experience autism and how our autism presents isn't necessarily like how the research or the diagnostic criteria presents it. So that was really interesting. So I started reading more, but it was like it was like having to unravel how I'd seen and understood the world for the first 28 years of my life. But anyway, I did go on to get my autism diagnosis. I chose to go to there's a Lorna Wing, it's called the Lorna Wing Trust in the UK, and Lorna Wing was a famous researcher on autism, and they're known specifically to understand autism in women really well. And went for the diagnosis, and they just, said right away that, yes, you're autistic, and then that's it. And it was like, hey, now I know. And then so at that point, I started to tell people around me that I'm autistic, I've got this diagnosis, and this is something that a lot of autistic people often find themselves being told, even by doctors and professionals, and people who know them very well, and people who are very well-read and very well-meaning. And I think at first it's something that can feel quite upsetting to hear, or quite surprising when people say that, because people don't realize the meaning necessarily behind what they're saying. However, when we think about how autism is represented in the media, actually, compared to that, I don't look autistic. I don't seem autistic because of how it's presented. So actually it does make sense, even though this is probably something that you shouldn't say, because actually the connotations it's almost like they're trying to compliment you a lot of the time. They're actually saying, like, you don't look, actually I had one friend who said to me, like, oh, if it makes you feel any better, you don't look autistic. And I was like, I explained to him afterwards, and he was like, okay, I completely see what you mean. But yeah, if we look at how autism, this is how autism is presented in the media. This is what we see autism as. So we have Sheldon Cooper, we have The Good Doctor, we have Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man, Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. So like some of these portrayals of autism, some elements of them, they are reflective of some experiences of autism. This is not to say that like this is all completely wrong. However, the problem is we only see one very specific type of autism in media, and so that's usually male, white to begin with, caricatured, often cold, lacking empathy, super genius. There's problems. Dustin Hoffman's character here is based on a real person, so that is one experience, this autistic savant, where you have this like very, very specific like talent for something, or almost like an ability that seems almost like superhuman, but then like lower ability in other things, and that type of person does exist, but it's a very, very small minority. But then most of the time, these characters are created, they're played by non-autistic actors. They're created not for a further understanding of autism, but for amusement in many cases. And particularly the Good Doctor in particular is a character that is very poorly received by the autism community and don't feel that they are represented. So this is, this is kind of how I feel when I see these representations, and I think they would feel very different if there was some more representation of different types of autism. But I don't feel that when I watch this, I don't see it as relatable. I think there may be some people that can relate to some aspects of it, but I think for most autistic people, particularly autistic women, they wouldn't understand why, they wouldn't relate to it and wouldn't understand why this is what we're seeing on media. So it's no wonder that people don't have a good understanding of autism, because this is all that they see. So the question is, where are the women? Where are the people of colour? There are some. They're newcomers. Some are. So this is from Sia's film Music, which was widely criticised and considered to be disastrous, particularly for its very very misinformed handling of the autistic character, who's here. We have Extraordinary Attorney Wu, which has been received much better, say, compared to Music, but I think still very much more caricatured depiction, and it's better than a lot of what's out there. But again, a non-autistic actor, it would be, not that I believe that all autistic characters need to be played by autistic actors, but please, some. There are a lot of autistic actors out there. Why is it always neurotypical actors playing them? It's got to think, because these characters are written by neurotypical people. Why are they writing these characters? Are they writing these characters to help understanding autism? In many cases, you see a lot in Korean dramas, for example, you see a lot of autistic characters, and they're always the same. And it's always not for the autistic character to exist in and of themselves, but to make the protagonist look good, make the protagonist and the protagonist so kind, they're looking after taking care of their autistic brother. So you've got to think about who is writing them, why are they writing them, what's the purpose of these characters existing. So in terms of understanding what actually autistic experience is like, particularly for women, non-binary people, people who exist outside of that typical male or white character, even male white autistic people don't necessarily actually relate at all to any of these characters that are portrayed in media. But I've just put up a few. I mean, there are lots of books out there. I've just put up a few that I found particularly helpful and relatable, just showing different experiences of autism and disability. I would highly, they're all memoirs basically. Yeah, they're all memoirs. I would recommend these books, but there's a lot more out there. Another way to learn more about autism is actually the characters in dramas, TV shows, and books that aren't labelled as autistic. So this is something that's called autistic coding. So autistic coding is where characters display autistic characteristics but are not explicitly labelled as autistic. So this is often something very unintentional, because there is such poor understanding of what autism is. Often people who are autistic or know people who are autistic but are undiagnosed and don't realise they're autistic end up writing autistic characters without realising. So when this, I don't know if anyone's seen this Korean drama, My Liberation Notes, but when this came out, it was really interesting because I was talking with a lot of my autistic friends who'd watched this, and all of us saying was that how relatable, particularly the protagonist is. The protagonist, they're not autistic. They're not like, well, they are. Well, in the drama, in the drama, none of these characters are autistic. They're just people who see. Particularly the protagonist sees and has a very different approach and understanding of the world. But we're all talking about this, like never seen something that we relate to like this. So it's often these autistic coded characters. It's often these writers, these filmmakers who are either writing from their own experience or the experience of people around them. Genuine experience of autism, but they don't know that they're writing about. But that's when the authentic, nuanced, presentation of autism often comes out. I have a novelist whose work that I've been translating that hasn't come out. I'm translating one of her upcoming books that hasn't come out yet. But again, like I've talked to her a lot about autism, and actually in her books too. So. There are plenty of writers out there who are writing autistic characters and don't realise they're writing autistic characters because they're not being diagnosed. Another example of this is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and if anyone hasn't read this book, I do really recommend it. Very short book. I guess it's a novella. It's about this woman, Keiko, who works in a convenience store. Various interesting things happen in the book, but she works in a convenience store, and she's meant to be this kind of quirky character, but she really relishes, she really enjoys working in a convenience store. Everyone says it's not a good job to have. Her family disapprove of it. It's not a low-paid job, but she really likes it. She loves the routine. She loves the structure. She likes she knows the sounds, all those things that come together that she really enjoys, even though society tells her that this is not good enough, kind of thing. And very interestingly, when I read this, I found there were elements that were incredibly relatable. Again, this character is not labelled as autistic. But looking into this, I saw that I found several articles written by autistic people on the internet, people who said that they really related to this character. One example is Nisha Dolan, who's the author of Exciting Times. And a quote from what she wrote in a Guardian article here. She said, "I thought my brain was too different to appear in a novel, but there I was. I smiled whenever I recognised an experience, which meant I basically smiled for the whole book. It puzzles me when people complain of not having connected with the protagonist. Characters usually think and act in ways I found alien. That's not because I lack empathy. Non-autistics would feel as I do about identifying if most books were about me and not them." So the question is, why is all this so important? Do people need to get autism diagnosis? Isn't it, if they're getting along fine without it, does it really matter? What's the issue about autism being presented as caricatures? Is it important? Well, I've just put a few statistics up here just to highlight why it is an issue that people are not being diagnosed, and why there needs to be better understanding in society of what autism is. Just see here, 8 in 10 autistic people will experience a mental health problem compared to 1 in 4 in a general population. So it's a big disparity there in terms of autistic people are experiencing a lot more mental health problems. Autistic adults are significantly more likely to die by suicide than the general population. Average life expectancy for autistic people is 54 years old, and there's 2021 statistics showing that only 29% of autistic people in the UK are in paid employment. That's despite a high proportion of autistic people wanting to be in paid employment. And I'm putting these here because these really mirror my own experiences. Being an autistic person trying to function in the real world, I believed when I was in my second job, I believed I would never be able to hold down a job. I didn't think I was capable of it. If I hadn't got my autism diagnosis, I may have been either unemployed, or I might have just worked I would have worked the least stressful job possible, despite the fact that I have a lot of passions and want to do a lot of things. I might have given up on that. And I know that a lot of, particularly women are misdiagnosed with other mental health conditions like bipolar, depression, anxiety, when actually all of these things they'll never get to the core until they get their autism diagnosis, because that's the reason why their anxiety is there and their depression is there, is because they're trying to function in a world that is not set up for them. And the thing I wanted to talk about next is that this is not a problem just with media. This stems from the research. The research is where it's coming from. This is not coming from nothing. This is what the research says that autism is. The research is having it's very skewed towards men, and a very particular experience of autism that doesn't line up with a lot of people's experiences, particularly women. So one of the key figures in autism research is Simon Baron-Cohen, cousin of Sacha Baron Cohen. They are related. It's quite funny if you go online on YouTube and look at interviews with Simon Baron-Cohen, a lot of people are very confused and think that Sacha Baron Cohen has given up his career in comedy. my mum always used to complain about Sacha Baron Cohen and say, well, look his cousin, he went to Oxford and did all this autism research, he could have been a very learned man. And I was like, yeah, anyway. So he's one of the central figures in autism research, and he's very influential, and he's one of the people that has really pushed a particular idea of what autism is. And I'm talking to someone who, I met him, I attended his lectures when he came to Oxford, I read his book. His books are terribly written, so I heard his research papers, there's a lot of there's a lot of psychologists or scientists, when they write, books for the general public, they're not often great. His are terrible and based on awful research, so I wouldn't recommend reading them. So one of his key theories that was very influential is called the extreme male brain theory of autism, and he divides his argument is based on this idea that we have these sex differences in empathizing and systemizing. So basically, women are good at empathizing, men are good at systemizing, and an autistic person is on the extreme end of the male spectrum. So obviously, with this very influential theory, people are not going to be diagnosing women, because they're going to be like, well, obviously it's going to be much more likely for a man to have autism than a woman to have autism, unless a woman has an extreme male brain, whatever that is. So unfortunately, it may, looking at it now, seem like it's very oversimplified model, but it was and continues to be very influential, despite the fact that there's research that there's actually no evidence for this extreme male brain hypothesis. But it continues to be referenced, and a lot of if you actually talk to any autistic person who's looked into this, they'll be very critical of Simon Baron-Cohen. But if you ever see a TV program about autism in the UK in particular, anyone looking for an expert on autism, it'll be Simon Baron-Cohen who's interviewed, unfortunately. And as you can see, this is one a source from Facebook where someone basically explained all the reasons, outlined in detail. They said here, the problem with Simon Baron-Cohen is he shaped how the world sees autism. So obviously it's not just Simon Baron-Cohen who's to blame. Psychology research as a whole is a problem, and having come from studying at one of the top psychology research departments in the country, I know from experience that the way that different conditions like autism, or even mental health conditions, are understood and studied is very much from an outside perspective, and not actually understanding what the experience is like. And it's very much as in studying, this is normal and this is abnormal. And there's a big problem because of people because of these researchers creating a very an image of autism and a diagnostic criteria for autism which is purely based around how autism presents externally in men and boys. This means that women are not accounted for whatsoever. And it used to be understood that the ratio of autism in girls and boys, men and women, was very disparate. So it used to be believed that it was generally quoted as 4-to-1. When I was younger, when my brother got diagnosed, people more thought it was 1-to-10. So one girl, there was almost no. So we knew lots and lots of autistic children, but they were all boys. And there was one girl that we knew of autism. And this is purely because of what this diagnostic criteria are like. So it says here on this paper here, for example, that it's believed to be 4-to-1, but they actually believe the true male to female ratio may be 3-to-4. So this means that there's generations and generations of autistic women who have been left undiagnosed, and have had no idea the why that they feel so different, and why that they've struggled. And you know, I've met and spoke to women who've been diagnosed at 70. My own grandma talked to me recently and had found my website and read my articles and said that she thinks that she's autistic. So at the age of 88, she's discovering this, but you know, and her whole life she's struggled with this and she's not known about this. And how things could have been different if they understood, you know, the reason that why they're different. Yes, so that's another big. So it's not just Simon Baring-Cohen, and it's not just the researchers that are. They're not the only reason why autistic women are going undiagnosed, like me, like my grandma, like many others. It's also due to this thing called masking. And so masking is explained very nicely here by this little graphic. But it's basically when in the case of autistic people, it's when you're hiding your autism. So you're trying to come across as quote unquote normal. And masking is not necessarily always a negative thing, and I think it can be a helpful thing within limits and in certain circumstances, because it's a self-protective thing. But it uses a lot of mental energy. It's very exhausting, constantly not being yourself, constantly having to hide yourself and who you are. And you don't realize that you're doing it. Unless you know that you're autistic, you don't realize that you're doing it. And it puts a lot of mental burden, causes a lot of anxiety. And the other negative effect of it is that you hide your autism, so you would even less likely to get diagnosed. And masking is much more common in autistic women than autistic men, because a lot of autistic traits are more considered. Men are more allowed to be blunt. They're allowed to be direct. It's okay if they don't smile as much, but women have a lot more expectations to be socially affable. So we kind of learn how to be neurotypical, how to act neurotypical, because that's expected of us. Women are also less, men are also okay. It's much more common for men to have friendships based on shared activities, which is much more common for autistic people than just to sit and chat. I would feel much more comfortable doing a shared activity with someone. I remember when I was at school, I always used to want to go to the computer room and hang out with friends there, but none of my friends wanted to come with me, and I absolutely hate just having to sit there and talk with my friends. But I went to an all-girls school, so I really struggled socially until I learned, to mask. So yeah, exactly. So this is what can lead to autistic burnout and sensory hangover. So not only are the women struggling more, they're also hiding their autism more, and makes them even more unlikely to get diagnosed. So you end up in that state. So back to that cat. So what does all this got to do with translation? So as I said before, I was in a normal workplace. I had a relapse of depression, and then I got meningitis. So this was like a string of, over the years, serious illnesses that I got from, I believe, stress and anxiety, from masking, autistic burnout. So I quit my job because I got meningitis and I couldn't work for months. But prior to that, I was going to quit my job anyway because I was like, something's wrong. And I heard from a colleague at the Korean Cultural Center about this place called the Literature Translation Institute of Korea. And I had never considered translation as a career before. I'd never thought about translating novels. I knew the novels got translated, but I'd never given it a great deal of thought. I knew all of the novels had translated, but I thought about that process. And I started to think, okay, maybe I should consider applying for this, because I'd started to do some translation in my job. We were screening a lot of indie films, and a lot of these indie films didn't have subtitles. They needed subtitles in English, and it was really difficult actually to find translators. Where we were in the UK, it was really difficult to find translators, and really, really difficult to find good translators. So sometimes I would just start doing the translation work myself, and I realised that this is really interesting and really fun. And then this idea of potentially a career as a literary translator was a revelation to me, because I thought maybe this is something that I could do. It's like a light at the end of the tunnel, because if I could do this, I don't need to work with anyone. I don't need to work in an office. I don't need to talk with anyone. I just need to sit with a book and do something challenging and exciting that I can also enjoy. So I thought, I will apply for this. And thankfully, I got onto it, and that was a great experience. The one thing the LTI career course does is not it might have changed now, was not the best at teaching, is the practical side of actually working as a literary translator. We did a lot of practice, but I came out of it having no clue what I was supposed to do next. So I applied for this program, the Emerging Translator Mentorship, and I was very fortunate enough to be accepted onto that, and I was mentored by Anton Her, who many of you know, wonderful translator and mentor, and like that was the turning point. That was the turning point in my career. He taught me, that I wouldn't have had any of this without Anton and his generosity. So I did that, and that's where it all started. So just to talk very briefly about what a literary translator actually does. So obviously when we're translating, we're moving one language to another, and these are just some fun graphics that show how a sentence might move about from a different language to another. So here we've got English and French. So we can see like the word, English and French are relatively similar languages. So we can see the words move about a little bit. And we get to German, it's a bit like, we see a bit more movement, there's a bit more going on. And then we compare, when we look at Korean and Japanese, it's a completely different story. And there's even like a little note at the bottom, the person that made it said it's really hard to say like this is in terms of order, this is how it's mapped, but actually the grammatical concepts do not map onto each other whatsoever. So that's kind of what we're doing, but actually it's not really like this. It's not a one-to-one translation. And this is just like a fun video done by Talk to Me in Korean about why we can't do literal translations, so I'll just play it.
You translated everything literally from Korean to English.
비 온다.
고생하셨습니다.
전 온다.
저면허.
맛있어.
맛없어. 이해가 안 가. What if you
Yeah. So as you can see here, even when we look at those little charts about these how we move the words around, direct translation doesn't work, particularly when you're translating from Korean. There you go. So actually what the job of a literary translator is a very creative one. And I think when you're particularly when you're first starting out as a literary translator, it's quite, I personally found it very difficult to give myself freedom to move away from the structure and word choice of the source text, and I felt like I had to be as literal as possible. But the more experience I had and the more I learned, I realised that actually, in order to be faithful to a source text, you need to give yourself the creative freedom to stray away from it in order to be faithful to the true essence of the source. So rather than doing a direct one-to-one translation, you wouldn't say, you don't say, it literally says rain comes, rain's coming in Korean. We never say that in English, right? That's not natural. It doesn't, and it sounds, we need it to sound natural like it is in the source. So we say it's raining, It's a very simple example, but actually you'll find, particularly when you're first starting out as a literary translator, or if you're a more experienced literary translator and teaching new translators, you'll find that they feel like really difficult to let go of the source in that way. I think it's both confidence, they think it could have been how they're taught. What we really need to do is read the source and understand the voice. We need to feel the voice and feel the essence of the source text in our original, and then we need to put that into English in new words. So you're creating something new that's being faithful to the essence of the source text. And that's something that comes with, I think, experience and confidence. But that's the challenge. That's the creative challenge of being a literary translator. So this is just to show you like what, in terms of the practical process of being a literary translator is very quickly. So this is an timeline example of the first novel that I translated. So as you can see here, it took over a period of about 3 years from starting to work on the book to publication. And a lot of cases you might have to stop halfway through. You might start pitching a book, you might never get the book into, get someone to publish a book. So you might not get the whole way through. But if you manage to get from start to finish, this is what it may look like, but it may look very different depending on each case. So the beginning is finding a book that, this is the traditional way where a translator is acting as an unpaid agent, but there are also many other routes to translating a book. But this is the kind of way that you're kind of told most often might occur if you are working on a passion project particularly, and when you're starting out. So in mid-2020 I read the book, I found out about it, I wanted to translate it. Towards the end of that year I contacted the author and I contacted the Korean publisher to ask them, I'd really like to work on this book, can I do a sample translation and can I contact Anglophone publishers and tell them about this book? And they said yes. So I did the sample translation, and then I pitched it to other publishers as well, but I also pitched it to Pushkin Press. And Pushkin Press actually read my email and liked it, the editor there. This is quite uncommon, cold pitches. It's very uncommon that they're picked up, but it was in this case. And then you go on to the actual doing a translation, sign a contract, do the translation, edit it, proofs, publication. So it's just a very quick example of what a book going from pitch to publish me could look like. So just to finish up, what does this have to what does this have to do with autism? Well, many it has to do with autism in many things, but one of the things that I have found is actually when I first went into translation, I became a translator because I'm autistic. I left my job because I'm autistic. I pursued literary translation because I'm autistic. But when I first went in, I tried to find other autistic translators. I tried to find people writing about it. I couldn't find anything. So I really wanted to connect with other people. So I did write about it. I did talk about it. And then over the months, a couple of years later, I discovered there were so many translators around me who came to me and said, actually, I just got an autism diagnosis. So there's definitely a strong overlap between these two fields, and there's a lot of INFJs, and not all of them have autism diagnoses, but I'm waiting. So yes, so I kind of developed a few. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why this might be the case. Why is it that autistic people are drawn to literary translation? These are just a few. These are just my speculations. I hope maybe there or exists. But I hope someone will write like a thesis or papers on this. But yeah, so, there's freedom to work in whatever environment you like. This pattern seeking. This pattern seeking personality or like characteristics is very strongly correlated with autism. Passion for reading, attention to detail. This idea of a structured creativity. So unlike being a novelist, for example, where you're kind of working from scratch in a way, you can be creative, but you have a structure to work with. I think really appeals to autistic people. Translation of refuge, working alone, struggling with a normal work environment. Yeah, a lot of these things from talking to other autistic people. I mean, for example, Deborah Smith, who translated The Vegetarian, she is autistic. She's openly talked about that now. She was the first autistic translator I met, or maybe not the first autistic translator I met, but first translator I met who said I'm also autistic, and that just blew my mind because she was my, kind of, what's the word? I looked up to her so much, and to think that we had that in common was so interesting. So I think that's all that I was going to say, and I have spoken for longer than I meant to. If anyone, I'm happy to answer any questions now or another time. Feel free to contact me as well. Yeah.